HOA. Karen had always been a thorn in my side, but nothing prepared her, or me, for the showdown that unfolded one muggy Tuesday afternoon. It started with a simple decision. I parked my unmarked police vehicle outside my home while handling paperwork. No lights, no decals, just a nondescript black sedan. But in Karen's world, anything unfamiliar was a threat to her perfectly controlled domain. She huffed past my driveway, notebook in hand, snapping photos and whispering to neighbors. Hours later, I returned from a quick errand to find a tow truck backing up to my car, with Karen triumphantly directing the operator. My blood ran cold. She had no idea that tampering with this vehicle wasn't just a petty HOA violation, it was a federal offense. I calmly approached, badge in hand, as she barked orders. What happened next would ripple through our entire neighborhood, leaving Karen with a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The neighborhood looked perfect on the surface, neatly trimmed hedges, pastel-painted homes with matching mailboxes, and streets named after trees that never grew here. It was one of those suburban enclaves where appearances mattered more than anything. The Homeowners Association ruled with an iron fist disguised in polite emails and glossy newsletters. Every lawn had to be cut just so, trash bins hidden precisely behind the fence, holiday decorations removed no later than January 5th, and heaven forbid you parked a vehicle on the street overnight. I had lived here for 3 years, mostly keeping to myself. As an undercover officer, discretion was second nature. My schedule was unpredictable, and sometimes I brought work home, files, surveillance footage, or the unmarked car when shifts ran long. Most of my neighbors were friendly or at least tolerant. They knew I was with the department, though I rarely volunteered details. But there was one exception. Karen. Karen was the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. While she held no official title, everyone knew she wielded influence over the HOA board, and her word carried weight. She prowled the streets with her phone camera at the ready, reporting the slightest infraction. A misplaced recycling bin, a child's skateboard left by the curb, or an unfamiliar car in a driveway, nothing escaped her notice. My job often required me to blend into hostile environments, but dealing with Karen in my own neighborhood felt uniquely exhausting. I had already endured her thinly veiled questions about my late-night comings and goings, her pointed comments about my non-standard vehicle, and the occasional flyer about HOA parking rules slipped under my door. I usually let it slide. Pick your battles, I reminded myself. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before her obsession with control collided with my world in a way neither of us could ignore. And on that humid Tuesday, with cicadas buzzing and the air thick with impending summer storms, the stage was set for a confrontation I never saw coming. Karen wasn't her real name, of course, but the nickname fit so perfectly that even her allies on the HOA board used it behind her back. Mid-50s, meticulously styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head, no matter the weather. Karen moved through the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen. Her wardrobe consisted of crisp polo shirts, pastel capris, and a clipboard that seemed permanently affixed to her arm. She had an uncanny ability to appear whenever something, or someone, fell out of line. Kids riding bikes without helmets. Karen would appear from nowhere with a lecture. A garden flag not explicitly approved by the HOA bylaws. Karen would take photos and email the board within the hour. Her dedication to maintaining the so-called character of the neighborhood was tireless, bordering on pathological. I had first encountered Karen not long after moving in. One evening after a particularly grueling shift, I had parked my personal car on the street instead of the driveway to avoid waking my wife. The next morning I found a bright orange warning notice taped to the windshield and an anonymous flyer about proper parking etiquette in the mailbox. It didn't take long to trace it back to Karen. Over time, her fixation on my comings and goings grew. She made a point of pausing whenever I was unloading gear from my car, sometimes striking up painfully forced conversations laced with thinly veiled suspicion. "You must work very odd hours," she'd say, her eyes flicking toward the unmarked vehicle in the driveway. So many different cars parked here, hard to keep track. I'd learned to deflect with polite nods, offering as little information as possible. It wasn't worth the trouble. But the thing about people like Karen is, They can't stand not knowing. The more I kept to myself, the more determined she became to uncover whatever imagined secrets she thought I was hiding. Her obsession wasn't just about me, it was about control. In her mind, the HOA existed to enforce order, and she saw herself as its righteous enforcer. The presence of an unfamiliar vehicle, especially one she couldn't easily classify, was a challenge to that order, and soon her need to assert control would drive her to make a mistake she couldn't undo. The unmarked car wasn't anything special to look at. That was the point. A late-model black Dodge Charger with stock rims, no external antennas, and no police decals. If you glanced at it parked on the street, you'd assume it belonged to some young professional with a taste for muscle cars. But beneath the surface, it was anything but ordinary. Inside, the dashboard held concealed lights that could strobe red and blue at the flick of a switch. The trunk housed an encrypted radio, a first aid kit, evidence storage containers, and a collapsible rifle case. The back seat had a hidden cage set up that could be deployed if needed. The windows were heavily tinted, not illegal, but just enough to keep curious eyes from seeing too much. It was one of several vehicles issued to our unit for surveillance and off-the-books assignments. Normally, I kept it in the department's secured garage when not on duty. But that week had been a mess of schedule changes and emergency call-outs. I'd clocked out late the night before after a multi-hour debrief and driven straight home, bone-tired and ready for sleep. When I'd parked the Charger in my driveway, the plan had been to return it first thing in the morning. Life, as it tends to do, had other ideas. A last-minute request came through to review some surveillance footage connected to an ongoing case. Rather than waste an hour commuting back and forth, I decided to work from home. The Charger stayed parked out front, tucked neatly along the curb, tires aligned precisely with the edge of the pavement to avoid violating HOA rules. I even double-checked the parking restrictions. Technically, vehicles could remain on the street for up to 48 hours without issue, provided they weren't commercial or oversized. But what I considered due diligence, Karen saw as an open invitation. Unfamiliar car, no clear owner, tinted windows, exactly the sort of thing that triggered her sense of righteous duty. I first noticed her circling the block late that morning, phone in hand. She slowed as she passed my house, eyes narrowed, lips pursed. When I stepped outside to retrieve the mail, her gaze darted away, but not before I caught a glimpse of her snapping photos. I sighed, already sensing where this was headed. Still, I figured the rules were on my side. The vehicle was properly parked and fully registered, and I'd be moving it within the allowable window. Surely even Karen wouldn't push further. I underestimated her resolve. By that afternoon, she'd escalated her campaign. Handwritten notes appeared under the windshield wipers. Unknown vehicle will be reported. Non-resident parking not allowed. Move immediately or face towing. I read each one with a mix of amusement and mild irritation. Still, I opted not to engage. No sense pouring gasoline on the fire. Let her have her moment, I thought. I'd be moving the car soon enough. But Karen wasn't satisfied with notes. She wanted action, and she was about to get more of it than she bargained for. The warning signs came faster than I expected. By the following morning, the tone of Karen's campaign had shifted from passive-aggressive to outright hostile. I stepped outside early to stretch and sip my coffee, only to find a neon green notice taped across the Charger's driver-side window. It was an official-looking document, though on closer inspection, it was just something Karen had clearly printed from the HOA's online template. Final warning, it read in bold type. Unauthorized vehicle. Towing will be initiated within 24 hours, if not removed. I exhaled slowly, torn between amusement and annoyance. This wasn't the first time Karen had overstepped her authority, but she was moving faster and more aggressively than usual. I peeled the paper off, folded it neatly, and carried it inside. I didn't want to escalate, but I also wasn't about to roll over. The HOA's own bylaws required a formal complaint and a proper notice from the board before towing could even be considered, neither of which had happened. Still, the presence of that notice suggested Karen wasn't acting alone. I had no doubt she'd been emailing the board all night, demanding immediate action. I decided to wait, figuring the car would be gone within the day as I'd planned. But as the hours passed, Karen's efforts intensified. She began making more frequent passes in front of my house, sometimes stopping her car entirely to glare at the Charger. I caught glimpses of her standing at the corner with her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. Neighbors noticed too. Around noon, one of them, a kind retiree named Mr. Jensen, knocked on my door. "Just a heads up," he said, lowering his voice. "Karen's telling folks she called a tow company. Says they're coming this afternoon." My jaw tightened. Now it wasn't just HOA bluster, she was moving to action. I thanked him and assured him I had it under control, though inwardly my patience was thinning. I debated moving the car then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was professional instinct, maybe stubborn pride. Either way, I decided to wait and see just how far Karen was willing to take this. She thought she was dealing with a careless resident who didn't know the rules. She had no idea what kind of vehicle and what kind of person she was actually messing with. And by that evening, the showdown would begin. The heat of the afternoon pressed down like a weighted blanket as clouds gathered low on the horizon, threatening rain. I sat by the front window, laptop open, sipping water and watching the street. The Charger remained parked along the curb, silent and unassuming. Across the way, Karen paced in front of her house, cell phone glued to her ear. Her expression was a mask of smug determination. Every so often, she'd glance toward my driveway as if daring me to intervene. Around 3 o'clock, the rumble of a large truck echoed through the neighborhood. I leaned forward and spotted a flatbed tow truck turning slowly onto our street. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with disbelief. She'd actually done it. The truck crawled to a stop in front of my house, amber lights flashing. The driver, a stocky man in his 40s, climbed out, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. Karen was on him instantly, strutting toward the truck in a self-important march. I cracked the window open just enough to hear. "That's the one," she declared, pointing triumphantly at the Charger. "Unauthorized vehicle. The HOA wants it removed immediately." The driver glanced at the car, then at his clipboard. "I didn't see any official paperwork from the HOA," he said cautiously. "Got a signed release," Karen huffed. "It's all been reported. I've documented everything. They're taking too long. I'm acting on their behalf." The driver scratched his head, clearly uncertain. I decided it was time to make an appearance. I set down my laptop, grabbed my badge wallet, and stepped outside. Karen's face darkened as I approached, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "You need to move this vehicle," she said sharply. "You're in violation of HOA rules." I kept my voice calm, professional. "This is an unmarked police vehicle assigned to me by the department. You are not authorized to order it towed." The tow truck driver's eyes widened. "Wait, this is a police car." I flipped open my badge. "Detective with the city. This vehicle contains equipment and evidence that you are not permitted to handle. Tampering with it is a federal offense." The driver took a cautious step back, already shaking his head. "I'm not touching it. No way." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. You're bluffing," she stammered. "You can't park wherever you want." I held her gaze. "I'm well within my rights, and now you've crossed a line." Her cheeks flushed crimson, but the bravado had drained from her voice. The driver climbed back into his truck, muttering about not wanting trouble. Karen stood frozen, her moment of triumph crumbling before her eyes. What she didn't know was that the situation was about to get even worse, for her. I watched as the tow truck driver hesitated in the cab, his hands resting on the steering wheel. The amber lights on the truck still blinked, but it was clear he wanted no part of this anymore. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't backing down so easily. She spun toward me, pointing an accusatory finger. "You can't just park government vehicles here like this. The HOA has rules and they apply to everyone, even you." I met her gaze evenly. "Karen, you've already ordered a tow on a police vehicle without proper authorization. That alone could land you in serious legal trouble. I suggest you stop now, before you make it worse." Her voice rose in pitch, drawing a few curious neighbors onto their porches. "I'm not afraid of your threats. You think flashing a badge makes you untouchable? I'll call the police myself and report you." I couldn't help a small smile. "By all means, please do." Her fingers jabbed at her phone screen as she stomped a few steps away, muttering furiously. The tow driver opened his window and called out to me. "Detective, I didn't know, I swear. I'm packing up now." "No harm done," I replied. "Just don't touch the vehicle." Moments later, I heard Karen's voice escalating on the phone. "Yes, I need officers here immediately. There's an illegally parked vehicle, and the so-called owner is impersonating law enforcement. I exhaled. Now she'd done it. She had no clue that the police she was calling would be my own colleagues. I stepped back toward my porch and made a quick call of my own, requesting a unit to respond and explain the situation officially. Better to have everything documented and on the record. Within 10 minutes, the familiar sight of 2 squad cars appeared at the end of the street, lights flashing softly. Officers Perez and Daniels stepped out, both seasoned pros I'd worked with before. They assessed the scene in an instant. Karen rushed to them, arms waving. "That man is breaking the law. He's pretending to be an officer and using that car to intimidate me." Daniels held up a calming hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Let's verify some information first." Perez approached me with a knowing smile. "Detective, heard you've got quite the HOA drama today." "You could say that," I replied. "Vehicle's mine, department issued. Karen here tried to have it towed." Daniels requested my ID and badge number, which I provided without hesitation. They ran a quick verification and confirmed everything matched. Perez turned back to Karen, now pale and trembling. "Ma'am, this vehicle is an active police unit. You had no authority to order it towed. In fact, attempting to interfere with law enforcement property is a serious matter." Karen's voice faltered. I didn't know. I was just enforcing the rules." "The HOA does not supersede state or federal law," Perez said firmly. "You've created a liability for both yourself and the association." The tow driver, seeing the clear shift in tone, quietly retracted the truck bed and prepared to leave. Karen, meanwhile, stood frozen, her earlier confidence shattered. Neighbors whispered among themselves, phones out, some filming discreetly. The entire street had witnessed her unraveling. As the officers finished their report and advised Karen to cease further actions, I couldn't help but feel a pang of reluctant sympathy. She had been so blinded by her obsession with control that she'd stumbled headfirst into a situation far beyond her understanding. Still, actions had consequences, and as Karen would soon learn, the fallout was only just beginning. The squad cars lingered at the curb, their lights now dimmed but still visible. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, the usual hum of suburban calm replaced by the low murmur of conversation and the occasional sharp gasp as details of the scene spread. Karen stood rigid near her driveway, arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes darting between the officers and the watching residents. Officers Perez and Daniels moved with calm professionalism, gathering statements from both the tow truck driver and a few key witnesses. I stood off to the side, letting them handle the formalities. Karen's face was a study in conflicting emotions, fear, anger, embarrassment, all flashing in rapid succession. The reality of her actions was sinking in, but her pride refused to let her back down completely. "I was just trying to enforce the rules," she insisted yet again, her voice now shaky and far less commanding. "You can't expect me to know it was some kind of secret police car." Perez nodded patiently. "Ma'am, we understand you may not have known at first, but once you began the process of arranging a tow without board approval or verifying ownership, you crossed into very dangerous territory." Daniels added, "Had the driver followed through, you could be facing charges related to interference with police property. You're fortunate this was caught in time." The tow truck driver, clearly rattled, chimed in. "I'm glad I stopped. No way was I going to touch a police vehicle. I want no trouble." Perez assured him he had done the right thing by stepping away once the truth became clear. Meanwhile, I remained silent, observing Karen's unraveling composure. I knew this was no longer about one woman's power trip. It was now a matter of public record. The officers documented every detail, ensuring a clear chain of events. Finally, Daniels approached me directly. "Detective, we'll be filing a full report. Do you want to pursue this further through the department or leave it to HOA legal channels?" I took a moment to consider. "For now, I want it documented and sent to the HOA board. I'll follow up if there are any more incidents." "Understood," he said. As the officers wrapped up, Perez addressed the watching neighbors in a clear, firm voice. "For everyone's understanding, this vehicle is a lawful police asset. No further action will be taken against it. We encourage all residents to consult the board before taking enforcement into their own hands." Karen's lips trembled, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, she seemed genuinely lost for words. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some offering sympathetic nods in my direction, others casting wary glances at Karen. I caught Mr. Jensen's eye and he gave me a small thumbs up. The squad cars pulled away, leaving the street in a stunned, charged silence. Karen remained rooted in place for several long minutes before finally retreating into her home, the door slamming shut behind her. The confrontation was over, but its echoes would ripple through the neighborhood for weeks to come. And deep down, I knew this incident had exposed a truth Karen would have trouble facing. Not everything in life can be controlled, no matter how tightly you cling to the rules. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Karen's usual patrols through the neighborhood stopped. The oversized sunglasses and clipboard were nowhere in sight. Word of the confrontation had spread like wildfire. Neighbors who rarely spoke to me now waved or offered knowing smiles. A few even stopped to share their own grievances about Karen's overreach. The HOA board held an emergency meeting 2 days later. Though not officially invited, I received a discreet update from a board member who sympathized with my situation. Apparently, Karen's unilateral action had blindsided them. No formal towing authorization had been requested or approved. The board voted to issue her a formal reprimand and temporarily stripped her of any unofficial enforcement duties. Legal counsel also advised sending a written apology to me and the department to mitigate potential liability. The letter arrived the following week. It was stiffly worded and clearly vetted by attorneys, but the message was clear. The HOA regretted the incident and affirmed that no further action would be taken against my vehicle or myself. As for Karen, she remained out of sight. Whether it was shame, anger, or both that kept her indoors, no one could say. But the neighborhood felt lighter without her constant surveillance. One afternoon, while walking my dog, I encountered Mr. Jensen again. He chuckled softly. "Looks like you might have done what the rest of us only dreamed of, taking Karen down a peg." I smiled, though the satisfaction was bittersweet. I didn't set out to embarrass her. I just wanted her to respect the limits of her authority. "Well, she got the message loud and clear," he replied. Still, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of caution. People like Karen often simmer below the surface, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim lost power. For now, though, the balance had shifted. The street was quieter, the air less charged with tension. Life returned to its usual rhythm, with neighbors exchanging more smiles than glares. Yet every time I passed Karen's house, I wondered if she stood behind the curtains, still watching, still plotting. Some lessons come hard, and in this case, the price of control had been public humiliation. Whether she would truly change remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, she would think twice before challenging an unmarked police vehicle again. The lesson from the whole ordeal lingered in my mind long after the tow truck rumbled away and the police cruisers vanished from the street. On the surface, it was easy to laugh at what had happened, a textbook example of a petty tyrant overstepping her bounds and getting caught red-handed. But beneath the humor, something deeper resonated. Karen's actions hadn't stemmed from malice alone. They were rooted in fear, in a desperate need for control. In her world, rules existed to maintain order and predictability. Anything outside that narrow vision triggered alarm. The unmarked car wasn't just a vehicle. It was an unknown, an element beyond her grasp. People like Karen are everywhere. They cling to structure, convinced that without their constant vigilance, chaos will reign. But in their zeal to impose order, they often become the very source of disruption. They forget that authority carries responsibility, that enforcement without understanding leads to harm. Watching Karen unravel reminded me of the delicate balance required in my own profession. As an officer, I wield real authority, sanctioned by law. But that power must be tempered by restraint, empathy, and a deep respect for boundaries. Karen had none of that balance. She acted from ego, not service, and it cost her. I also reflected on my own choices. Part of me wondered if I should have intervened earlier, diffused the situation before it reached a boiling point. But another part knew that sometimes letting a lesson unfold naturally leaves the strongest impression. If I'd simply moved the car or confronted her with words alone, she might never have grasped the gravity of her actions. Seeing the flashing lights, hearing the calm rebuke from uniformed officers, that was a message no neighborly chat could deliver. There was also a broader lesson for the community. In the days after the incident, several neighbors approached me to share their frustrations with the HOA's culture of micromanagement. They spoke of feeling watched, judged, unable to relax in their own homes. Karen's downfall had opened a space for honest conversation. Change often begins with a single event that breaks the pattern. This, it seemed, was ours. I took heart in that. If nothing else, perhaps the confrontation had sparked a shift in perspective, one where empathy, communication, and common sense would carry more weight than rigid rulebooks. As for Karen, time would tell whether she truly absorbed the lesson. Pride runs deep, and the desire to reclaim lost status can be powerful. But for now, she had been reminded, publicly and unequivocally, that no one is above the law, not even in the confines of an HOA-controlled cul-de-sac. And sometimes the very vehicle you seek to remove carries more authority than you ever imagined. In the end, the incident served as a strange kind of blessing. What began as a simple act of parking my vehicle turned into a moment that rippled through the entire neighborhood. It reminded everyone that power without wisdom is a dangerous thing, and that even the most seemingly mundane situations can reveal much about a person's character. For me, it reinforced the value of patience and the importance of standing firm when faced with injustice, no matter how petty it may seem. And for Karen, well, whether or not she chooses to truly reflect on her actions is her own journey. Life has a way of humbling us when we need it most. I share this story not out of spite, but as a reminder to anyone reading. Before you act on assumptions, seek understanding. Before you assert control, ask yourself if it serves the greater good or simply your ego. And if you ever find yourself itching to call a tow truck on an unfamiliar car, you might want to pause and consider. You never know what that vehicle might be or who it belongs to. Sometimes, the lessons that stick with us the longest come from the moments we least expect.